protagonist of this film, Hui Ling, she's a Malaysian Chinese. So she represents the Malaysian Chinese youth. The public education is kind of limited in Malaysia, so we can't really go into the universities that we want to go to. So she wants to go to Taiwan for her studies. During this journey of trying to save enough money to go overseas, something bad happened to her. She lost all of her savings. So she became desperate and became involved in this human trafficking business. What she witnessed in the end is something that's been happening in Malaysia for the last few years, the trafficking of Rohingya refugees.
Okay, kan ngồi sao?
Naik kau ni. Lagi naik. Apa tuang? Tunggu ni. Cepat.
Malaysia is a multi-ethnic country, so the Chinese minority, we are like 25% of the entire population, including myself. So my films are usually very personal. So I always want to tell stories based on the world that's around me now. So I think that's one of the reasons why I had Hui Ling as the door for audiences. She's also sort of like my door.
A Lâm, A Sệ, A Học, Hui Ling. So, what are you chuẩn bị rồi?
Chuẩn bị dah.
For me, I wanted to make the film as accurate as possible to our everyday life. So we do speak multiple languages every day, So especially in the location where we shot the film, it's actually the border between Malaysia and Thailand. So it's like North Malaysia. So that's the place where, it's very Thai influenced. People speak in Malay, but the Malay is also mixed with Thai, So ultimately, Hui Ling, actually, if you can see in the film, she's also an outsider. So she's like an outsider in her own country. It would be very fake if I try to limit it to one language, I shot the film with translators because even when I was in the region, I didn't understand the language. So for us, it's also an adventure, to understand the place a little bit more while we were shooting there. Because while I was preparing for this film, I met some NGO and I interviewed some refugees. I learned this word Aqerat, which actually means afterlife in the Rohingya language. It also sounds very similar to a Malay word, Aqerat. So somehow we found this commonality between the Rohingya and Malay language. They mean the same thing. It's about afterlife. So the tragedy is that they escaped from death in their hometown. Yet they came here and so they are still being exploited. There's this injustice. They have to endure after they came to Malaysia. So things didn't really become better.
Hui Ling, hi ben Muhammad.
At the same time, it's also a journey for my protagonist, especially Hui Ling. As she gets deeper and deeper into this human trafficking business, she's losing her humanity. In the middle of the film, she made a choice, and that might also be a beginning of a redemption, So it's also like a spiritual journey. I mean, for me, I always have this some people say it's a very idealistic view of cinema. I always believe that because cinema is forever, we always use cinema as something to remember the past and these things. So I feel this, tendency to try to capture, some moments of tradition. the old man who was in the film. He's considered like a master like for this puppet play. And in Malaysia there are only two masters left, and they are having problems like trying to get like a successor. Once he passes away, there might not be anyone who knows the things that he knows. So for me, it was more like we were shooting in town and he was there, so I really wanted to have him in the film as well.
Ni tak buat kerja muka belatu. Ayah pun perasa senil lenenya tidak alai palai perasa ayah ni tua ku perasa gemuk bagian lapar perasa ayah.
Why are we are trying so hard to chase other things as we become a more like modern nation? Like for Hui Ling, she wants money, she wants to go to Taiwan for her studies. Everyone's like trying to get rich because of economical reasons. But by doing that, everyone has leave behind like all this tradition, and the tradition that they believe in, it became more like it's more like a caricature. So in the end, that's what we are becoming. Like, we don't really know our tradition anymore. We just have like this crazy very shallow reasons to cling to them, and we cling to it based on our own advantage. So I that's the reason why I had these things in my film.
把钱借给庙，这样呢，佛祖呢才会保佑我们，我们做东西才会顺顺利利，你懂吗？懂吗？
One of the main influences for this film is actually Roberto Bolaño's The Savage Detectives, which had a structure like this.
Tempat tu dulu kampung.
I love to read. I was so influenced by the book that when I made this film, I wanted to try something similar. Like, at first we are following Hui Ling's perspective, so like we are seeing everything through her eyes. It's more like a documentary. But once the title appears, we are actually kind of switching perspectives. In some ways, I'm kind of shifting the perspective more to Malaysia itself, like to the people who are in Malaysia, like why we are struggling to, why do we really want to leave the country. So I think that's one of the reasons behind the way I structured the film.
Mak aku suka sangat.
The cameraman of this film, Leslie, we have worked together for like almost 10 years. When we work together, we inspire each other, So the truth is, I don't really storyboard my films. And most of the places that we went to for the shoot, like we have never went to before, So we figure out our shots while we were there. We improvised quite a lot, especially for this film, not just between me and the cameraman, also with the actors. Especially with Hui Ling, like the script is actually really short because like there were almost no dialogue. So most of the dialogue were improvised. We discussed the lines while we were shooting it or just before rehearsals. But for me, I don't really need them to follow like each single word, except for the important parts like the ending. Like some monologue. Most of the time, I prefer if they use their own words, to express the feelings. But for me, I want to give them more freedom, like to explore their roles. It's more like a jamming session. It's like a jazz. Yeah. I did a sound design in Bangkok. He's a sound designer, but he's also a filmmaker. Sora Yel's Prapapan. So basically, we call him Yossi. So Yossi and I, we have been working together also like for the last few years. He comes to Malaysia quite a lot to do like sound recording and sound mixing. He was working on the film for a couple of weeks. Then I flew to Bangkok to join him. So I went into the studio to see what he had been doing, and it was mind-blowing. He decided to experiment a lot. So he also got his mentor to help him. So his mentor is someone who worked on Api Chapong's last two films. So yeah, it was quite a privilege for me to watch, to see how both of them worked on the soundscape of the film. I think that's the reason why I like making films, because I'm surrounded by people who also love films, so it makes me feel, there are crazy people like me, yeah.